Well, friends, in the last video, I was talking about how I left the Church of England to join the Reformed faith. I spoke about how in the 16th century, the Reformation in Europe of the Christian church had two arms. One arm was Lutheranism, but then there was another arm which was also Protestant, of course, but was not Lutheran and involved John Calvin, Martin Bucer, Peter Martyr. It was this arm that went on to influence greatly the English Reformation. But that was the 16th century, and here we are in 2024. And I've had the experience of being in the Church of England for 20 years. And yet, when I first heard the teaching of the Reformed doctrine, it sounded very unfamiliar to me. So clearly, the doctrines of the Reformed faith were not in the church that I was a part of for 20 years. Come to think of it, looking back, I didn't actually receive much teaching at all about the heritage of the church or the doctrine down through the time. But when I read the Bible, in there are many narratives about the people of God setting up monuments or landmarks so that the next generation, when they see it, they will ask, well, why is this landmark here? And then the answer will come, this is to remind you, to call to mind that you belong to the people of God. And one instance in particular is the prophet Samuel. He led the people of Israel back to God after they'd gone astray. And it was at that point that Samuel set up a monument and he said, I'm going to call this place Ebenezer, which means thus far the Lord has helped us. And there it was, a landmark that people could look at and say, there it is, thus far the Lord has helped us. Now, in the last video, we saw a landmark, which was the second book of Common Prayer, written by Thomas Cranmer, was greatly influenced by Martin Bucer, who actually came from the Swiss Reformation from Strasbourg. He had suffered persecution. He came over to London and was close with Thomas Cranmer. And in the second book of Common Prayer, the doctrine of the Holy Communion is very much in the Reformed doctrine. Now, if you will allow me, for the sake of argument, I would like to represent the Reformed doctrine as this long arrow, and I'm going to say that inside the Reformed doctrine, it contains the true gospel, the correct teaching unto salvation from the Bible. And hopefully we can agree that at some point the Roman Catholic Church in England, the papacy, it left that way. And the Roman Catholic Church was like the beast of Revelation, wasn't it? Where it actually persecuted believers like William Tyndale and the Lollards, who wanted to convert the Bible into English. They were put to death or executed for their faith. But then we have this move back through Cranmer back into the gospel. And I would like to continue plotting the Reformed doctrine against the sort of ups and downs of the church in England. Okay, if you'll allow me, bear with me, you'll see what I mean. After Henry VIII, he was succeeded by his son Edward the Sixth for a short reign. But in that short period, there was a great step made forward in the Reformation. The Lutheran arm, people from there did not come across to London, but it was from the Swiss arm of the Reformation, you see. The Reformed faith came, and during the reign of Edward VI, they were a great influence on the English Reformation. So from my point of view, this was a deadly, fatal, seemingly fatal blow to the beast system. It looked like it was down and out. But then, incredibly, the beast, which seemed to have received a fatal blow, waxed strong and came back in the form of the regency of Mary Tudor, who greatly tried to bring the church in England back to Rome. And over a 3-year period, I think she executed 300 people at the stake for their Protestant views. And interestingly, the thing that condemned people, like John Rogers was one of the first martyrs at the hands of Bloody Mary. The doctrine that condemned them was actually the doctrine of the Holy Communion and transubstantiation. It was for the refusal to confess that was what condemned them. It's interesting to think about that, how doctrine, these people, what are we to say to people who will say that doctrine doesn't really matter? Can't we just set it aside? But let's continue. And we know that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation to those who believe. And the gospel was like a young lion that had been let out of a cage, hadn't it? And Mary Tudor could not keep it contained. And after she passed, the church in England moved back to Protestantism under Elizabeth I. And then here we have another significant landmark, which is the 39 Articles which were set up. And there we have it, Ebenezer, thus far the Lord has helped us. It was a time of great spiritual victory, was it not? That Roman Catholicism had been thrown off and those years of darkness. And when we look back, we can see a landmark there coming out in the 39 Articles. And guess what? The 39 Articles very much overlap with what is the Reformed faith and the Reformed faith that my church adheres to today. And it gets even better after this point. Elizabeth I was succeeded by James I in 1603, who, by all accounts, was of the Reformed doctrine. We can see here a landmark that James I, who authorized the King James Bible, which we read in our church even today. King James, he sent a delegation, he sent to the Synod of Dort, a Dutch Reformed Calvinist conference, which was to defend the Reformed faith, you see. And it set out the canons of Dort, which were a defense of the Reformed faith. And there, looking back in the regency of James I, we can see a clear landmark of the Reformed faith in the Church of England. And what happened next? James I was succeeded by his son Charles I, who was hostile to the Reformed faith and also hostile to Parliament. And Charles I appointed as Archbishop somebody called William Laud, who set about dismissing Reformed ministers and replacing them with ministers who did not agree wholly with the doctrine of the Reformed faith, but differed in certain aspects. So this was a departure. This is where the Church of England was wrestled away from the Reformed doctrine. But do you know that caused Charles I's behavior there towards Parliament, but also his attitude and Laud's attitude towards the Reformed faith is actually played a part in the English Civil War. The situation was that Parliament had ejected, the King Charles, and he had been sort of thrown out of London. When England was a republic, this Parliament, what did it do? It had an assembly, which is called the Westminster Assembly, and at that assembly, it gathered together as many church people or believers as it could to agree on a set of doctrine for the Church of England. And the confession in our church is actually largely based on this very confession that I'm talking about, which at this time in English history, when we look back, there's a landmark where I can see our doctrine was part of the fabric of the Church of England. So looking back through the history of England through the lens of the Reformed faith, I can see these different points or landmarks when the church in England had adopted the doctrines of the Reformed faith. And here I am making a video series saying I left the Church of England to join the Reformed faith. Isn't that interesting? So it begs the question, what point did the Reformed faith and the Church of England separate last? I have only been reading these history books, and I've actually just reached the point of the Westminster Confession. So I'm looking forward to reading on. Though I have read these books here about George Whitefield by Dallimore, a minister in the Church of England in the 1740s, preaching the doctrines of grace. But also, the church, many of the churches in the Church of England locked him out for doing that. There have been these times where the state has upheld the Reformed doctrine, and then there have been times where it's persecuted the Reformed doctrine. And looking back through the history, you can see times where the church threw off defeated the spiritual forces of darkness, and there were great victories. These times were marked by godly people setting up landmarks in the form of canons or catechisms or confessions. And if you look back, you can see these landmarks, and hopefully you can see the doctrine which you hold today. You can see that doctrine in those confessions. When I was in the Church of England, I was in it for 20 years, but at one point we had a new vicar come to the church. And do you know, the new vicar, he said, what I'm going to do is I want us to all make a new vision statement for the church. And I was on the church council at the time, and so I was part of this process. And I was clueless. I thought, oh, that sounds like a good idea. But do you know, looking back, as far as I can remember, we were just starting from a blank page. Just starting from a blank piece of paper. There was nothing, I've never heard of any of these ones that have gone before us, the old paths and the canons, confessions, catechisms. There was no reference made to them. In fact, the congregation was asked to provide stuff from dreams and impressions and pictures. So let me encourage you to go to your church website, click on that tab that says what we believe, and have a look at what's on there, and then see if you can see that in the different landmarks down through the ages. One thing comes to mind, though, is that doctrine can be a dirty word. There's this attitude that looking through the past, these divisions and so on, and conflict, they were caused by the doctrine. And so people say, oh, let's just be pragmatic and put the doctrine aside, and let's just forget about it and all get along. If you abandon doctrine, and if you forget about the old paths and these landmarks that have been put up in the past after these times of spiritual victory, if you just ignore all of them, then where does that leave you, my friend? Please do give the video a thumbs up, and if you found it helpful, leave a comment, because that really encourages us here at the church to keep making these videos. Thank you so much for everybody for your support, and I'll see you in the next one.